Welcome back to TYT. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And for our members and super chatters, I'll read your comments in a little bit. But for now, I think it's important to at least attempt to decipher what the United States is planning to do in regard to the ongoing war in the Middle East against Iran. And luckily, to help us kind of make sense of the nonsensical messaging we've been getting from the Trump administration is Professor Glenn Dieson, a political scientist and the host of the Glenn Dieson Show on YouTube, a show that I watch religiously and highly recommend. Professor Dieson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation and the kind introduction.
So I actually wanted to start off with some theoretical or philosophical questions because, if any of you in the audience have studied international relations, there are different theories. The theory of liberalism and there's the theory of realism. And when I was going to graduate school, the theory of realism really resonated with me, and I can tell it resonates with you as well. But there's something that I wanted to point to. I don't know if you would call it a flaw or maybe a weakness in realist IR, but it's this notion of rationality. Now, when you look at someone like President Donald Trump, who appears to be quite irrational, like invading Iran was irrational. Well, first let me ask you, do you feel that it was irrational?
Yes, I think it wasn't based on sound intelligence and the ideas hadn't really been scrutinized properly either. So I don't think that was rational. I think it could have been explained by ideology and also, of course, competing interests within the state.
Exactly. So competing interests within the state, corruption, the type of relationship the United States unfortunately has with Israel, that could lead to irrational decisions. So would that be considered a potential flaw in realist theory?
Yeah, it would, because, well, realist theory isn't really a foreign policy theory. This is something initially Kenneth Waltz was outlining. He was just saying that the international distribution of power is what creates incentives for how states should behave if they want to maximize their own security. But if you look more within the neoclassical realism, then they also look at the decision maker essentially as an intervening variable between the international distribution of power and foreign policy. So you can at times see that states could act irrationally. So, for example, at the end of the Soviet Union, you would have competition between Yeltsin and Gorbachev. So you would then they wouldn't act as a rational state because of this internal competition. So, but it is a weakness within political realism that is often ignored. I like the neoclassical realist approach simply because it allows for, looking at ideologies, institutional commitments, or political infighting, intelligence services, selling wars. I mean, it can be many things that essentially makes the state act less rational.
Since you brought up Kenneth Waltz, who I loved reading from, especially when it came to some of his more provocative writings, he's the one who popularized the whole notion of nuclear peace theory. So under the assumption that state actors are rational actors. And so the idea is nuclear proliferation doesn't necessarily mean that you live in a world that's less safe. The notion that everyone has a nuclear weapon and the use of a nuclear weapon will lead to mutually assured destruction actually leads to a peaceful world. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, within the realist theory, the assumption is that peace is created because there's a balance of power. So, nuclear weapons are the ultimate deterrent. So if you would look at why Russia and the United States never went to war, probably they would have if it wouldn't have been for that nuclear deterrent. So this is a very sound argument to make that this is a nuclear peace. However, critics point out that the reason why it creates peace is because the level of destruction is elevated to such a high level that it's less likely that we'll go to war. But if we do go to war, that's pretty much the end of it. So it can be compared to huge military alliances. If the level of violence increases to a level where a country wouldn't want to go to war with NATO or a corresponding military alliance. However, if that war happens, then it will be all the more messy, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the war in Iran. So, in an interview with Maria Bartiromo today, President Trump, actually it was last night, President Trump gave Americans the impression that he's wrapping things up in Iran. Let's take a quick look at that video, and I want to get your reaction to it.
Right now, you would have Iran with a nuclear weapon. And if they had a nuclear weapon, you would be calling everybody over there, sir. And you don't want to do that.
Well, you keep saying was. Is this war over?
I think it's close to over, yeah. I mean, I view it as very close to over. You know what? If I pulled up stakes right now, it would take them 20 years to rebuild that country.
He says it's close to over as his administration, his Pentagon, is currently sending additional troops and military assets to the region. So what is your read on this? Is he just bluffing publicly while behind the scenes he's escalating? Or is he just sending military assets there just in case? What are your thoughts?
Well, it could be both. It could be that it's better to do negotiations if you have a powerful military option that they could use if negotiations fail. But I suspect that that the diplomacy has not been very genuine, so it is not just that the weapons are being sent into the region, it's also how the ceasefire has been managed. For example, putting a naval blockade on Iran, an act of war, would be an escalation during this period. Not just against Iran, but also spreading the conflict. This is effectively cutting off China, or intended to at least cut off China from Iranian oil. So it seems as if, it seems to me that it's trying to sell a war here by claiming that it's almost over, and the fact that there's been so many different objectives in this war. Whatever objective they're currently referring to can give certain indications. So, for example, if he's arguing that this is about nuclear weapons, I would feel a bit more reassured then, because the Iranians would be willing to make a deal about not acquiring nuclear weapons. They said they didn't want one. In the past, they had made agreements which they accepted very intrusive inspections. So if he's talking about nuclear weapons, then we should be a little bit reassured.
We'll be back with the news, but first, I wanted to tell you about something that's helped make my day a lot more efficient, and that's Cook Unity. Cook Unity has helped me stay balanced and nourished with my everyday meals, especially when I have so little time to cook. They're the first meal delivery service bringing you high quality, locally sourced meals from award-winning chefs right to your door. I just tried their spicy rigatoni a la vodka with crispy basil breadcrumbs. The best part was that it's low sodium, soy-free, and even peanut-free, yet packed with so much flavor. Cook Unity makes it easy to eat well while trying a variety of cuisines from all around the world. Every meal is handcrafted by chefs and made in local micro kitchens, not these large production facilities. Your food arrives fresh, never frozen, in packaging that keeps meals fresh in the fridge for a whole week. There are hundreds of dishes to choose from, and the menu is updated constantly. You also get 7 different dietary preferences: vegan, paleo, pescatarian, gluten-free, dairy-free, and more. Experience chef-quality meals every week delivered right to your door. Go to cookunity.com/TYT or enter TYT before checkout for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week by using code TYT or going straight to cookunity.com/TYT.
When he starts to talk about protests, then the issue then is regime change. And when you don't have a replacement government in the rear, a regime change essentially means the destruction of Iran. So follow the model of Syria, Libya, or even just balkanize the whole country along ethnic lines. So that's an existential threat to the Iranian. That's why they responded so fiercely in terms of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz and doing this military bases. Otherwise, I just would add that one of the reasons why we never had why there was difficulty to make a nuclear deal was because, Washington always linked the nuclear deal to other issues, be it reducing its conventional deterrence, that is missiles, drones, or cutting off itself from its regional partnerships, be it with Yemen, Hezbollah, Hamas, And well, this is essentially impossible. This is a full capitulation, because if you want to destroy Iran, you want them to give up their conventional deterrent. And well, just as a side note, I would add, I don't think we should. I think forcing Iran to give up, forcing them to fear for their existence and forcing them to give up their conventional deterrents, I think that's a disaster, because that's the ultimate recipe for wanting a nuclear deterrent. If you can't rely on the conventional deterrent, then you definitely need a nuclear weapon. So I think this is the disaster of this war. Making the Iranians fear for their existence while demanding that we strip them off their conventional deterrent, it's not what you want to communicate.
Not only that, but also, Professor Dieson, people are talking about this war with the cover stories, right? And it really bothers me, because I want to be blunt, I want to be straight, and just talk about what the real goal is here. Now, the United States and Israel have two separate goals entirely. Actually, I don't even know what the United States genuinely wants here. I think Trump got goaded into this war, manipulated into it. I don't want to take his agency away. At the end of the day, he's the commander in chief, and he shouldn't have believed the Israelis. But nonetheless, he got sucked into this war. They put out a list of objectives. Obviously, regime change at this point seems like a fantasy, but this is a war that Israel wanted. And the reason why Israel does not want Iran to have a nuclear weapon isn't because Israel is afraid that Iran is going to wipe them out with a nuke. Everyone is aware that Israel has a clandestine nuclear program. They're not part of the non-proliferation treaty, and in fact have threatened to use their nukes multiple times in this war alone. What Israel wants more than anything is to weaken Iran to the point where they are no longer a challenge to Israel's expansionist project. In fact, they talk about it openly in Israeli media. Just yesterday, I showed a video of an Israeli program where they're talking about wanting to spark a civil war in Lebanon in order to weaken it and annex land in Lebanon. They would, and if you don't have Hezbollah, if you don't have to worry about Hezbollah, which is backed and armed by the Iranians, well, it's going to be easier to annex southern Lebanon, as they're attempting to do right now. So the idea that Iran wouldn't be allowed to have ballistic missiles is insane. And when you look at Lebanon, if the Lebanese government genuinely wants to pursue disarming Hezbollah, that would also be insane. That would mean you are clearing the path for Israel to come in and take your country. That's my read of it. What do you think? Am I being hyperbolic?
No, I think that's exactly what they're going for, and I think a lot of this can be traced back to this clean break strategy of Israel since the 90s. Actually, it's an interesting strategy because it happened to emerge right after the Cold War, when the US was unconstrained. The US thus also pursued a hegemonic policy where global primacy is what would create peace, not balancing interest with other powers. Now we saw, in the lieu of this, the same, and the Israeli beginning to embrace the same. In other words, they wouldn't anymore pursue diplomacy, compromise, any trade of land for peace. Instead, peace will be secured through dominance. With the US behind it, Israel could just defeat all its adversaries. Of course, the kingpin in the region is Iran, so that will be the final target to take out. So I think the desperation in Israel now is that they see that the international distribution of power is shifting. So for all these decades now, it never had to make any concessions, never had to make any compromises, because it could always dictate the terms and it would always have the US behind it. Now, if you see that the distribution of power is shifting and the United States might not have the same presence there in the future, what you do, you have two options. You can either scale back and start to make a deal with your neighbors, or you can go all in and essentially knock out all your main rivals, then primarily the Iranians. So as a result, the Israelis bet everything on this, I think. So they're overstretched already. They have manpower problems, and this is going for taking out the adversary. And it's worth noting that in Lebanon, that Hezbollah was developed emerged in opposition to Israeli occupation. So the idea now that Lebanon should purge all of Hezbollah, help the Israelis, as Netanyahu suggested, and then Israel can just annex territories from Lebanon, it doesn't really make any sense at all. So it's hard to say where this is real or if it's disinformation, if they actually do have any cooperation with Lebanon on this issue. But it doesn't seem sustainable.
So you make a good point about the growing multipolarity of the international landscape, and that is something that Israel has to contend with, and the United States, especially as China is involved in this. China relies on Iran for a huge portion of its energy needs. China's not happy about this blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that Trump announced, and at least today appears to be enforcing to some extent.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.